Hi, I'm Olive. I was invited to my own family's reunion and still ended up seated with the kids. They said I was still figuring life out while sipping wine poured from my investments. No one asked what I built. No one noticed what I owned, but they used everything I gave without my name. Then, as they raised glasses to themselves, a helicopter landed. And when the pilot called my name, why did they all drop theirs? I pulled up to the Langston estate in a rented Corolla, its paint already dulled by the South Carolina heat. It hummed quietly compared to the black SUVs and glossy Teslas lining the circular driveway, their engines growling like gatekeepers. I parked near the hedges, out of the way, where no one could say I'd blocked anything important. Not that I ever did. The house loomed like I remembered. White painted brick, tall windows dressed with plantation shutters, and a porch too big for anyone to sit on. Inside, it held the kind of southern hospitality that looked perfect in photographs but felt like posing beside a stranger for too long, smiling but aching to leave. I stepped out, heels catching on gravel. A valet I didn't recognize took my keys with a polite nod. He didn't ask if I was family. I didn't correct him. Two catering staff carried trays toward the back patio, ignoring me like I was another server late for duty. Arrive, be pleasant, don't provoke. Leave early, I whispered to myself, a mantra I'd rehearsed since the invitation came. A voice called out from the veranda. Well, look who made it. I turned just in time to see Isolde clinking a champagne glass with one hand and holding court with the other. She wore emerald green, her signature color, and a smirk I'd learned to read too well. To the shining stars of the family, she called, voice syrupy with charm. And, of course, to Olive, who's still figuring life out. We love her curiosity. A round of polite laughter followed. Someone even clapped. I smiled like I was part of the joke, though my knuckles whitened around the stem of my glass. I walked to the drink table, pretending I needed more ice. My chest felt tight, but I knew the rules. Show nothing. Let them believe they'd drawn blood without bruising skin. They always found a way to remind me I was the unfinished one. The one who didn't have kids, didn't flaunt a husband, didn't come attached to a last name that built foundations or owned commercial blocks downtown. A week ago, I'd gotten her text, just 6 words and a winking emoji. Better skip this one, babe. Heavy on family achievements this year. I almost didn't come. I'd stared at that message for hours, phone screen dimming, lighting up again. The old me would have ghosted the weekend, would have said she had a client emergency or was traveling for a conference no one would fact-check. But not this time. I was done letting silence write their version of me. A hand grazed my arm, my Aunt Brenda. Still blonde, still stretched too thin by yoga and wine. I heard you're in tech? She asked, voice coated in curiosity that wasn't really curious. Like, apps or something? Something like that, I said, avoiding the path that led to a real answer. Not because I couldn't explain, but because I'd done it too many times, and the follow-up was always the same. Well, she nodded with faux cheer. We're all proud of our kids working in real jobs too. I didn't flinch. I'd built a portfolio worth 9 figures. I'd funded companies that now powered hospitals, clean water systems, and schools. But sure, real jobs. I walked farther in. The lawn was dotted with white tables, each ringed by clusters of perfection. Doctors with coordinated kids, lawyers comparing property tax rates, influencers posing for branded drink shots. Everyone had a part. Everyone played it with practiced ease. The Golden Cousins, Isolde and her siblings, occupied the center, their voices rising above the jazz music like GPS signals guiding the rest of the family. No one looked toward me. I searched for a seat. Not one hand waved me over, not even a nod. People moved in groups like schools of fish, and I was drifting alone, outside the current. I spotted an empty chair under an oak tree at the far edge, not near the action, but not inside either. Just enough distance to observe, not enough to vanish. I sat, adjusted the hem of my linen skirt, and watched. A small child darted past with a plate full of cupcakes. Her frosting-covered fingers caught my eye as she slowed, looked at me, and offered one. "You look like you need it," she said plainly. I smiled, took the cupcake, and nodded my thanks. The air grew quieter as I bit into the sweetness, the jazz softening into background hum. The more I sat there, the more invisible I became, and somehow, the more present. A shadow moved near. Isolde walked past, her heels clicking softly on the flagstone path. She didn't stop, just raised her glass and smirked again. I didn't blink. They see me as a shadow, I thought, but shadows shift. I pulled out my phone. Scrolled past family threads, ignored a group text about dessert photos coming soon, and opened a private folder, hidden deep inside my Notes app. The file was labeled Meridian Holdings, Transfer Authority. I tapped it once, then leaned back in my chair. From somewhere distant, low and steady, a hum began. The laughter still echoed in my ears when I made my way under the white canopy where lunch was being served. Round tables were dressed with white linens and centerpieces that tried too hard, hydrangeas and monogrammed menus, as if aesthetic could replace warmth. I moved slowly, scanning for my name. There it was, written in looping cursive, all flourish, no care, Oliva. One letter, and I vanished. I paused, debating whether to fix it or just move on. No one around me noticed. No one cared. So I didn't either, not out loud. I glanced at the table where my so-called peers sat. Isolde, polished and laughing, her brothers with loosened collars, their wives trading Botox appointments like they were market tips. A few chairs had purses draped over them. My name wasn't among them. My presence hadn't even earned a placeholder. Instead, I found my name card nestled awkwardly between a group of tweens and a few catering staff taking a break. A child beside me asked if I wanted to trade my dessert with hers. One of the waiters smiled at me kindly. That was the warmest moment I'd had since arriving. I sat down. Not because I wanted to, because standing would have made it worse. From where I was placed, I had a clear, bitter view of the hierarchy. The golden cousins glowed in coordinated colors. The adults who mattered, so they believed, hovered near the center. And then, there were people like me, orbiting just far enough out to make exclusion look accidental. Conversation rippled from the head table about promotions, awards, investments. Words like IPO and private equity floated in the air like a language only the chosen could speak. No one asked me a thing. No one even looked my way, unless it was to glance with casual politeness and then redirect their attention to someone who matched their world. I caught myself watching Isolde laugh too hard at a joke her husband whispered. 3 years ago, she had called me crying, begging for help after her startup pitch flopped. I'd connected her to the right funders. Now she couldn't remember my name. Literally. A younger cousin, no older than 11, turned to me mid-bite and asked, "Are you one of the kitchen people?" I didn't laugh. I didn't correct her. I just blinked, nodded, and handed her a napkin. From the corner of my eye, I saw someone unfamiliar take a seat beside me. Tall, tan, just enough effort in his hair to signal he was from out of town. He looked around, clearly confused. "You part of the family?" he asked casually. "Or here for, diversity reasons?" I turned to him slowly, searching his face for irony. Found none. "Neither," I said. "I'm the ghost in their stories, unnamed, but funding the dinner." He blinked, unsure whether to laugh. "I was joking," I added flatly, though I wasn't. He chuckled. Still not sure. I turned my gaze back to the main table, jaw tight. It wasn't the first time. Years ago, at a company gala, I'd stood at the check-in desk only to be asked whose assistant I was. Not, "What's your name?" or "Are you on the list?" Just the assumption, if you're not center stage, you must be backstage. People couldn't place me, so they invented a box small enough to contain their discomfort. I excused myself. Not to cry. I'd lost the appetite for that. I needed a mirror, a pause, a reminder. Inside the guest bathroom, I washed my hands slowly. The mirror above the sink was ornate, oval, the kind that distorted your face just enough to make you question your features. "You didn't fly here to play small," I whispered. I opened my phone, scrolled to my alerts. One popped up. Board confirmation, Paradise Island. Final check-in, 4:15 p.m. I didn't respond. I just closed the alert, tapped my lipstick, and stared back at the mirror until my reflection steadied. I walked back out, not toward the table I was assigned, but to the massive oak tree shading the far edge of the lawn. No one asked where I was going. No one noticed I'd left. I sat on the grass. Alone, yes, but not invisible. A child wandered by again, the same one from earlier. She held out another cupcake. "You look like you need this," she said. I took it. The frosting was slightly melted, clinging to the paper like it knew how delicate appearances could be. I smiled at her, genuinely this time. She skipped away without waiting for thanks. Around me, the reunion unfolded like a movie on mute. Glasses clinking, laughter spiking at all the usual beats, group photos forming with practiced precision. I sat at the edge of it all, cupcake in hand, watching the actors play their parts. They may have the center, I thought, but I have perspective. A breeze picked up. Then, faintly, a voice behind me. "She still thinks she's one of us." It wasn't said with cruelty. That would have been easier. It was said like truth. I didn't turn around. The sound returned, low, steady, rhythmic. I checked my phone again. 2:42 p.m. I smiled. This one wasn't forced. The room was colder than I remembered, not from the air conditioning, but from the way everyone filed into the hall like it was a ceremony rather than a celebration. The curtains had been drawn. Rows of cushioned chairs faced a large screen, already glowing with the first slide. Our pillars, our pride. I stood in the back, one hand on a sweating glass of water. No one greeted me. No one noticed me. Maybe that was the goal. Isolde walked up front in a fitted navy dress, her voice warm, practiced, like she was hosting a TED Talk. "Tonight, we look back at who we are and how we got here. Family is our foundation." The lights dimmed. A slow piano began to play, soft and sentimental. Images flickered. Summer lake houses, weddings, hospital newborns, crisp college acceptance letters held up like lottery tickets. Every image captured joy, legacy, victory. Familiar faces filled the screen over and over again, some of them my cousins at different ages, some uncles at awards, aunts mid-speech. And then there was one, just one, frame where I appeared. It was a blurry group shot. I stood at the far right, half-turned, my face in motion. You could almost crop me out without noticing. And maybe they had. The audience clapped. I didn't. What hit harder wasn't being forgotten. It was being remembered just enough to be denied. I felt the floor shift, not literally, but the way gravity tilts when something inside you wants to collapse, but you don't let it. My mind went somewhere else. I saw myself at 7, standing beside a backyard fence with a plastic trophy in hand. Regional Spelling Bee champion. My cheeks were pink from the sun and effort. I had just beaten 20 other kids. I waited for the family picture they promised. Everyone huddled near the cake. My name was called once. Then someone said, "She's probably shy," and they snapped the photo without me. That night, my mother told me I should have spoken up, should have pushed through, that I'd missed my chance because I was too quiet. For years, I believed it. That being overlooked was a symptom of something wrong with me. But now I knew better. Maybe I wasn't invisible. Maybe they just didn't want to see me. The slideshow ended. People wiped tears, hugged. Someone yelled, "That's how you do a tribute!" As the lights came up, my father made his way over to where I stood. He always had that walk like he was about to offer life advice no one asked for. "They did a good job," he said, gesturing toward the screen with his cup of punch. "Really captured the legacy, huh?" I sipped my water. "Sure, legacy's strong," I replied. "Just not always accurate." He chuckled like I'd made a clever joke, then added, more casually than he should have, "Well, not everyone turns out to be a winner, Olive." "But that's life." I didn't respond. Didn't need to. My silence had grown sharper than any comeback. I turned and left the hall, pushing through the side doors into the twilight. The sky had softened into hues of lavender and smoke. Jazz drifted faintly through the open windows, notes half caught by the breeze. I sat on a bench just outside the patio, pulled out my phone, and opened a video someone had already uploaded. Langston Legacy Tribute, 2025. I skipped to the part where the cousins' photo montage rolled. I watched again, frame by frame, and I noticed the comments. "Wow, such an accomplished family. Love this. Real generational wealth here." And then, one line, buried under dozens. "Where's Olive?" I froze, scanned the username. Someone outside the family, a friend of a cousin maybe, but they'd noticed. Someone saw the absence they tried to hide. I walked back in slowly, avoiding eye contact, and found Celine leaning near the bar, sipping something clear, probably soda, always was. "Did they forget me by accident? Or design?" I asked. She looked at me for a long time, not surprised, not dismissive, just quiet. "You make some people uncomfortable, Elle," she said finally. "You don't play the part they wrote for you." I nodded, more tired than sad. "Then maybe it's time I write my own." She reached into her purse and handed me a small envelope. "I wasn't sure when to give this to you," she said, voice lower now. "Figured tonight was the night." Inside was a photo, an unedited version from the slideshow, a backyard 4th of July party from 5 years ago. In the version we'd all just watched, I'd been absent. But in this one, I was there, right in the middle, holding a niece on my hip, laughing. I stared at it. They hadn't forgotten me. They had removed me. The dining hall glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, flickering reflections dancing across silver cutlery and polished plates. I stood near the entrance, scanning the printed program that had been neatly placed on every table. "Acknowledgements and reflections," it read in elegant serif font, lined with names that spun through family branches like a roll call of pride. Isolde's name appeared not once, but twice. Celine's husband was listed. Even a cousin's fiancé was scheduled to speak. My name? Not there. I traced the lines again, just in case I'd somehow missed it. But no, not even in the smallest footnote. A hand grazed my elbow. I turned to see Aunt Ramona, always adorned in pearls and suggestions. "You probably didn't have much to share anyway, right?" she said with that sugar-laced chuckle. "No offense, sweetheart." None taken. I smiled back, calm, gracious, perfectly silent. Inside, something nodded just beneath my ribs. A few months ago, I had been invited, by email from the family committee, to speak on resilience for the scholarship fund they love to brag about. I'd accepted. Spent hours writing it. Had Celine look it over. Polished every word. I'd sent it to the family organizer. Received no reply. Just quiet. Now I knew why. Erasure isn't always loud. Sometimes it just prints a different name. As the string quartet began to play softly in the background, I pulled out my phone, opened the document folder, and tapped Delete on the file titled Legacy Speech. Final. A symbolic gesture. But it felt like slicing a cord that had been tugging at my chest for years. I followed the usher to my assigned seat. The arrangement of tables was its own statement. The main family cluster was in the center of the room, long tables connected in an elegant U-shape. My seat, at a side table near the staff's water station, nestled between a folding chair and a high chair meant for toddlers. Someone handed me a plate early, before the first course was officially served. "We figured you wouldn't mind," they said gently. "Would you be okay helping with the kids' table? They're a bit short-handed." Of course they were. Of course I would. I nodded. And I did. I helped cut grapes, wiped chins, poured tiny cups of apple juice, and smiled as if that were the role I had auditioned for. But I was simmering, because they hadn't just assigned me a seat, they'd assigned me silence and service. I felt the weight of eyes now and then, not warm glances, not concerned, more like watchful, monitoring, to see if I'd make a scene, to see if I'd do what I'd always done. Absorb the blow, play it smooth, vanish into grace. A child knocked over her cup, spilling sticky red punch across the white linen. Before anyone could react, I was there, grabbing a napkin, blotting the mess before it stained. "She's always been so helpful," someone said behind me. "Quiet too," another added, tone fond as if that were praise. I folded the napkin with careful precision, each corner meeting the other in silent symmetry. Let them believe I'm folding. I'm actually unfolding. Dinner ended with polite claps, dessert trays that skipped my table twice, and a slideshow of black and white photos none of us had seen before. I stayed seated, sipping lukewarm tea, invisible but listening. Afterward, I stepped into the hall, cool marble tiles muffling my footsteps. I needed a moment to breathe before they moved into speeches and staged smiles. And there he was, Uncle Warren, the elder, the judge of all things family. "Elowin," he said, his voice thick with southern warmth. "You've always known your place. That's rare these days." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Sometimes it takes knowing your place to outgrow it." He blinked, confused, smiled half-heartedly. I walked away before he found words. Back in the dining room, the microphone crackled. Everyone turned. "Isolde Black, please come to the podium." Chairs shifted. Applause swelled. I clapped too, politely, not a ripple on my face. A few heads turned toward me. I could feel their gaze. They remembered, perhaps, that I used to be the keynote speaker at these things, back when my startup was their trophy, back when I was interesting. But tonight, no one had asked for my voice. That was fine, because this was the last dinner they'd host without knowing who really paid for the silverware. The air outside had thickened, not from the weather, but from the quiet vibrations of tension bouncing through crystal glass and starched napkins. Post-dinner mingling had begun. The estate's lounge buzzed with restrained laughter, shallow toasts, and people spinning the evening into a night they'd remember for the wrong reasons. I stood by the French doors, holding a glass of dry wine that tasted like watered-down pretense. Near the fireplace, a cousin waved around a framed newspaper article, local press, praising a community-driven real estate project that had supposedly saved an old downtown landmark from demolition. The plaque at the bottom bore no names, just a mention of Langston family contributions. What caught my attention, though, was the small printed code beneath it. 6 digits. A holding company name. It was mine. Isolde stood in front of them, radiant under low lighting, modestly dismissing their compliments. "It was a family-led initiative," she said. "We pooled our best minds." The applause was soft but approving. I didn't say a word, not yet. That project had been mine from the start, acquired quietly through a shell company I'd set up to protect the deal from political noise. It was never meant to be a Langston victory lap. I'd chosen silence so the family could have a win, so they could feel proud without knowing where the rope had come from. But they hadn't just taken credit. they'd remodeled the truth. I stepped away from the group and opened my phone, scrolled through files until I found the original property deed and investment log. My name, my signature, sat at the bottom of every document. They had repackaged my generosity into their narrative. I bookmarked the moment, not to confront, but to prepare. I moved toward the bar, only to overhear a voice that stopped me mid-step. "She's been traveling a lot," Isolde said to a guest beside her, swirling her drink with faux modesty. "Probably still figuring herself out," another voice chimed in. "The quiet ones always struggle with identity, huh?" I stepped closer, deliberately this time. "Sometimes," I said calmly, interrupting them. "The quiet ones just don't need to narrate everything they build." Their smiles froze. A few heads turned. One man chuckled nervously, then shifted toward the bar as if the conversation had never happened. Isolde took a sip, the rim of her glass covering the corners of her smirk. I didn't need a fight. I just needed the moment to land. Later, near the veranda, a cousin passed around a business magazine left open on a side table. The cover blared, "Legacy in Motion: How Families Drive Innovation Through Shared Vision." On page 4, a quote jumped out at me. One I'd said word for word at a private board meeting, but no attribution, just the line, "Visionary legacy begins with bold ideas." They didn't steal my quote. They stole the right to say I said it. Celine found me minutes later. She looked tired, like she'd been watching a car crash in slow motion and realized she was related to the driver. "They're not just erasing you, Elle," she said quietly, handing me a folded napkin with ginger ale. "They're replacing you." I didn't flinch. I nodded. This wasn't neglect. It was strategy. "They want a legacy without the inconvenience of the truth," I said, "but they forgot who funded it." Back inside, I pulled out my phone again, opened the folder I'd labeled months ago, in case it comes to this. 2 PDFs, real estate ownership, signed and dated. I uploaded them to a secure site, forwarded them to my publicist, one I hadn't used in years. Subject line, "When truth needs no permission." Then I walked back toward the bar. Someone tapped their glass. "So, who actually led the real estate project?" they asked. A few glances moved toward Isolde. She smiled and raised her hand slightly, about to speak. "Funny," I said, voice even. "I have the deed. Want to see it?" The room froze. The sound of a fork hitting china somewhere nearby was the only reply. I turned, walked toward the balcony, and left them to their silence. The next morning arrived with a hush that felt deliberate. Sunlight filtered through the garden canopy, catching dew on the edges of tablecloths. The breakfast setup was as polished as everything else in this house. Handwritten menu cards, glassware catching glints of morning gold. But the energy had shifted. Last night's chill lingered in the way people sipped their coffee slower, laughed with more restraint, and avoided each other's eyes too easily. I walked toward the patio and picked up a mug of black coffee, steam curling up like a warning signal I no longer needed. Under the gazebo, a small group had already gathered. I recognized the faces: cousins, spouses, second-tier investors pretending to be uncles. In the center stood Isolde, animated and bright, performing, a summary of startup strategy like she'd spent the last decade building the landscape herself. And really, it's all about positioning the burn rate against a tiered funding cycle, especially if you want to scale post-Series B. I stood perfectly still. The words were mine. Every line of that explanation, mine. I'd said it to her during a private Zoom call 6 months ago, back when she was asking how to pitch her new concept to a grant board. And now, she wore it like a tailored blazer, word for word, and they were nodding like she'd spun it from thin air. I said nothing, not because I didn't want to speak, but because I was memorizing. Who nodded? Who praised? Who'd quote her later and never know they were praising me? At the edge of the conversation, a younger cousin stood beside a croissant tray, beaming. "I got the consulting gig with that nonprofit," he said too loudly, seeking attention. "Oh, the one connected to Isolde's network?" someone asked. He nodded proudly. "Yup. They said she lined up the funding. Real legacy stuff." I nearly choked on my coffee. Legacy stuff. That nonprofit had been my passion project, funded quietly, with my name nowhere near it on purpose. The grant code he mentioned matched one I created through a shell org last spring. Isolde hadn't lined it up. She'd just nodded when the check cleared. I looked at them and thought, they've been living on what I planted while pretending it sprouted from family soil. That stung. Not because I wanted praise, but because they were rewriting the authorship of my life. A voice rang out across the table. "You know what's admirable about Isolde?" an older cousin declared. "She's generous, but never needy." Laughter followed. Forced, familiar. Another chimed in. "Unlike some people who help and expect credit like they invented compassion." Forks clinked. Heads dipped slightly. Eyes moved. To me. Still holding my coffee, I took a step forward, just enough to be heard. "There's a difference," I said evenly, "between seeking credit and correcting a lie." Silence followed. Real silence. Not awkward, not uncomfortable, just revealing. I set my mug down. No rush, no dramatic exit, just firm enough to mark the moment. They went back to chewing, but slower. I turned and walked toward the far end of the patio, where the garden opened into a sloping walkway down to a row of trimmed boxwoods. Celine followed behind, quiet until we reached the oak tree where the kids had played yesterday. We sat. The wind had picked up slightly. Morning air tugged at the hem of my linen pants. For once, I welcomed the movement. "I used to think keeping quiet was noble," I said. Celine didn't ask why. She didn't need to. "I think it was permission," I added. She watched the branches above us. "And what will you do now?" I exhaled. "I'll stop giving it." I stood, brushing off my hands, and walked toward the house. Upstairs in my room, I opened my laptop and clicked through my folders. Ownership, Langston Trust, confidential. Grant allocations, Q1, Q3 summary. Legacy event, misattributions. I clicked each file and uploaded them into a secure shared drive. Then I opened a blank email to my advisor, my legal team, my media contact. Subject, when truth needs no permission. Attached, real estate titles, signed contracts, internal documents. I paused, then typed, "Prepare the public drop. Noon tomorrow. Let's change the family narrative." My finger hovered a beat longer than usual over "send later." Then I saw my reflection in the black glass of the screen. My face wasn't hard. It wasn't cold. It was steady. Not angry. Just done. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, the kind that made everything feel like a painting. Beautiful, but flat. Cocktail hour was in full swing. Glasses clinked, laughs carried, effortless and hollow. I walked toward the married couple's table, drawn more by curiosity than any real desire to be welcomed. There was an empty seat, just one. As I stepped closer, a cousin reached for her clutch and dropped it squarely on the chair. "Oops," she chirped, not looking me in the eye. Another cousin leaned in from across the table, a lazy grin on his lips. "You'll probably relate better with the younger crowd anyway. They're on the patio, talking about TikTok or startups or whatever." A few chuckles followed. Not mean, just easy. And somehow that made it worse. I didn't argue. I nodded once, pivoted, and walked away. Stone-faced. Measured. My heels made no sound on the grass, but inside, I was cracking. From the garden path, I turned to look at them. Their ease. Their certainty. Isolde poured wine like a queen, her hand always gesturing, always centered. They sipped, posed for selfies, talked about school tuition and Europe and the best team for estate law. To them, I was an incomplete sentence. Unmarried at 38. In this family, that meant I was unfinished. Unclaimed. I was a space they couldn't label, so they called me something safer. Invisible. It wasn't the first time. I remembered a different reunion 6 years ago. My startup had just secured Series A funding, and I came straight from a pitch meeting. Exhausted, but proud. They'd seated me with the kids, literal kids. When I asked why, they'd laughed. Well, we figured you'd want to keep it low pressure. They don't just seat you. They seat your value. Later that afternoon, during the family toast beneath a rented pergola wrapped in fairy lights, the clinking of glasses signaled something ceremonial. I stood in the back, as usual. A hush fell over the crowd. Uncle Warren stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. "We'd like to honor someone," he said. "A woman who embodies legacy, grace, and vision." He opened the box slowly. Grandma's ring. An heirloom passed through 4 generations. Platinum with a sapphire set so deep it looked like it swallowed secrets. I stopped breathing. Isolde stepped forward. She smiled wide, hands to her chest like she was overwhelmed. "Oh, I didn't expect this," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Grandma would be proud," Warren continued. "You carry her spirit, Isolde. You truly do." The crowd clapped. The photographer snapped 3 photos in 5 seconds. Isolde slipped the ring on, then wiped a dramatic tear. I didn't cry. I clenched my jaw so tight my molars throbbed. Because that ring had once sat in my palm. 2 years before Grandma passed, I visited her in hospice. We'd sat by the window, the air thick with eucalyptus oil and soft classical music. She'd handed me a small pouch. "I want you to have this," she'd said, voice papery. "For safekeeping, until it's time." It had felt like a covenant. After she died, the ring was gone. I'd asked my aunt once, delicately. "Oh, honey," she'd said, "it must have been misplaced. You know how things get shuffled during estate stuff." No, now I knew. They didn't misplace it. They reassigned it. They didn't just take the object. They rewrote the promise. I didn't speak to anyone as the toast ended. I walked inside, my breath shallow, my pulse a slow throb beneath my skin. In the back corner of the house, behind a quiet door near the study, I found the archivist, James. He'd worked with the Langstons since my grandfather's day. He was almost family. Almost. He looked up from his desk. "Miss Hope," he said, standing quickly. "I need a copy of the family asset log," I said. "Post-funeral." He blinked, clearly uncomfortable. "That file's not—" "You owe her more than silence," I said. He nodded once, disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he handed me a sealed manila folder. "You didn't get it from me," he said. "I didn't," I replied. I didn't open it. Not yet. I walked upstairs, past murmurs and half smiles, and entered my room. I opened my laptop, typed slowly, deliberately. Subject: Corrections to the family legacy. I attached the folder, the ring's registry entry, scanned documents from Grandma's will, the speech I'd never given, photos unedited, the recipients, every family member, and the press list Isolde had once shared with me during networking week. I scheduled the email, 10 a.m. tomorrow, just before brunch. I added one last line, just before clicking send later. Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you defend. The estate lawn shimmered with careful perfection, tables lined in ivory linen, floral arrangements shaped like they'd been airlifted from a bridal magazine, and mimosas poured with just enough pulp to seem artisanal. The media had been invited under the guise of a legacy brunch. Cameramen whispered instructions, a drone buzzed overhead, and just like always, I was seated away from the action, only this time, it was on purpose. I sat at a small table beneath a dogwood tree, a little apart but with a direct view of the stage. From here, I saw it all. Isolde, pacing behind the podium, note cards in hand, fake humility painted across her face. The rest of the family chattered happily, oblivious. I checked my phone. 9:59 a.m. They built a stage with my bricks. It's only fair I take my foundation back. The brunch began with a short video, edited beautifully, of course. Titled The Black Legacy. It opened with soft piano music and slow fades into family achievements. Golf tournaments, groundbreakings, charitable events, always smiling, always curated. Then the camera swept across a framed family portrait that I recognized immediately. It was taken last year, allegedly, just for the Christmas card. But here it was, printed huge on the screen, framed in gold at the front of the room. And in it, I was a shadow, blurred, off-center, faded. I remembered that day clearly. I'd arrived early, had helped organize chairs, even handed out waters to toddlers melting under the heat. But when the photo came out, I assumed it had been cropped accidentally. Celine leaned in, whispering, "They erased you in high resolution." I didn't react. I just raised my glass of tea and took a sip. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the room changed. Buzzes started softly, then became a chain reaction of alerts. Phones lighting up, tablets buzzing on laps, even one reporter looking confused at her smartwatch. I didn't look at mine. I knew what was in that email. Subject: corrections to the narrative. Inside were documents, property deeds bearing my name, the holding company charts, screenshots of messages, the original photo of Grandma handing me the ring, the one they said was misplaced. Gasps moved like wind through the crowd. Utensils hit china. A wine glass toppled. One reporter stood, flipping through her tablet, then walked briskly toward the podium. I stayed seated, calm, centered, just sipping my tea. Isolde stepped up, face pale, voice cracking before she spoke. "So many incredible accomplishments," she started. "Our family is proof that legacy is about unity, about collaboration." Another phone dinged. A man stood. "Isolde, is this you listed on the deed?" A murmur rose. She fumbled her note cards. "She's just trying to ruin the mood," she snapped, but her mic was still on. A tech assistant, young and clearly nervous, leaned toward her and whispered, loud enough for the room, "It's still hot." Everyone heard. The same mic I was denied 2 nights ago now broadcasted her unraveling. Truth doesn't need a microphone, it just needs timing. Near the front, someone opened the unedited photo from the email. I saw it reflected in his screen. There I was, centered, steady, hand resting gently on Grandma's shoulder. "Why would they crop her out?" someone whispered. "Because she was never invisible," another said. "Just inconvenient." The cracks in their narrative weren't quiet anymore. They echoed. I stood, slowly, smoothed the front of my dress. The faint chop of blades began in the distance, a sound I'd been waiting for all morning. All heads turned. From beyond the treetops, a black helicopter appeared, small at first, then lower, hovering before descending onto the lawn. The wind from the rotor whipped napkins into the air, hair flew, hands shielded faces. The pilot stepped out, uniformed, precise, and called out over the mic system, "Ms. Hope, your island is ready." Every gaze followed the voice. Isolde stared, lips parted, but saying nothing. I didn't pause to meet anyone's eyes. I walked past the tables, past the brunch that had never had a place for me, past the legacy they tried to exclude me from while feeding off the wealth I quietly built. Celine stepped beside me. "Are you ready?" "I never needed a spotlight," I said softly. "Just a runway." We kept walking, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back. The helicopter had barely disappeared from view when the brunch lawn fell into an eerie silence. The kind that settles after a storm, not from peace, but from aftermath. Music was never turned back on. Waitstaff moved like ghosts, clearing untouched croissants and lipstick-smudged glasses without a word. The media, once glued to their equipment, were now discreetly packing up, eyes down, or worse, curious. I wasn't there to watch it, but I'd planned for that. My assistant had recorded it all. From her hidden vantage behind a hedge near the east path, she captured the stunned expressions, the lowered voices, the sideways glances like everyone was suddenly unsure how they were supposed to feel. Isolde had walked straight into the house after I left, her steps too fast to be composed. Her shoulders, once pulled back with certainty, now hunched in tight defense. I imagined she would rush upstairs, call someone, demand to know how this had happened, but it was already too late. Inside, staff had gathered near the family's famed legacy wall, a digital screen showcasing achievements, milestones, births, weddings, foundations. And yet, my name, my image, my contributions remained absent. One staff member, a younger intern, hesitated as they prepped for a new rotation of images. "Should we add her back?" he whispered. The project lead didn't even look up. "Wait until the dust settles." That was the problem. Even when caught, they didn't correct. They calculated. Celine, who had stood by me through every exclusion, became their new target. Two aunts cornered her near the foyer. "Why didn't you tell us she was behind all this?" one of them hissed, voice pitched low but sharp. Celine tilted her head, the way someone does before they deliver something unvarnished. "Would you have listened?" she asked calmly. Grandfather passed them just in time to catch her tone. He stopped. "She made us look like liars," he said flatly. "No," Celine answered without hesitation. "You did that yourselves. She just printed it." Meanwhile, I stood barefoot on my island balcony, holding my phone, reading the wave of messages pouring in like a flood. Apologies laced with self-defense, confusion masked as curiosity. One cousin wrote, "We didn't know it was really your land. Why didn't you say something sooner?" Another said, "This is all spiraling too far, Elowen. Maybe we should talk." I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened Facebook. The estate's official page had just posted, "Thank you to all who attended this weekend's legacy brunch, a celebration of history, tradition, and family." There were 5 photos, 4 quotes, 1 video. I wasn't tagged. I scrolled to the comments. And for the first time ever, I typed something back. "You forgot someone again." It didn't need likes. It didn't need shares. But it got them anyway. Then came something different. A notification from TikTok. Emma, my youngest cousin, just 9, had posted a short clip, shot from the front lawn, a bit shaky, her high voice narrating to her phone. "My Aunt Elowen was the coolest. She flew away in a helicopter. I want to be like her." The video went viral overnight. Thousands of comments poured in. The silent ones always build the strongest exits. "Elowen is a whole era. That's not a retreat, that's a rise." I smiled, not because it was revenge, but because it was release. That evening, back at the estate, a courier in a Navy uniform arrived with a single envelope. He walked past the hush of the dining room, past murmuring relatives and unanswered calls, and stopped in front of Isolde. She opened the envelope, brows furrowed. Inside was a photo, the original legacy portrait, uncropped, unfiltered. I was there, at the center, my hand resting on Grandma's shoulder. On the back, in ink only, I used, "Erase me again, and I'll frame the truth, again." The fallout didn't just land, it rippled. By late afternoon, Isolde's private chat group was everywhere it shouldn't be. Screenshots had been leaked, first among the younger cousins, then somehow, like wildfire, onto Reddit. It only took one line to shatter the remaining illusion. "Startup ghost strikes again." Followed by, "She'll fade like always, we'll edit around it." And just like that, I wasn't silent anymore. I was a hashtag. Hashed the silent storm trended for 3 hours. Longer than most family legacies stay intact. I didn't post a thing, didn't respond to the buzz. But when I saw the comments, the memes, the avalanche of support from complete strangers, strangers who saw me clearer than my blood ever did, I smiled, just a little. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits. The estate, meanwhile, was simmering. A distant cousin, one I barely remembered, had the decency to call. "Elowin, about the room we gave you," he started, his voice thick with guilt. "I survived it," I replied. The room they'd assigned me had no working air conditioning, faced the back parking lot, a view of dumpsters and buzzing flies. The walls were bare, no towels, not even bottled water. The other cousins, suites, balconies, complimentary wine chilling in marble tubs. I hadn't said a word when I arrived. I'd lit a candle from my purse, placed a folded scarf across the single chair, and made the space my own. That was the thing they never learned. Some people needed chandeliers to feel rich. I only needed peace. Now I was back in my own villa, on my own island. The kind of silence here wasn't punishment, it was earned. I sat on the balcony, iPad in hand, watching the replay clips circulating online. One video paused at the moment Isolde had been handed a silver award by a local councilwoman. She was glowing, practically shaking with delight. That had happened mere minutes before my email hit their inboxes. I watched her face in that clip, knowing what was about to collapse behind her. How long would she try to spin it? How far would she stretch the timeline to make herself the victim? I tapped forward to the helicopter footage. Overhead camera, the crowd scattering in wind, my back straight, my heels slicing into the grass like they belonged there. I didn't rise to be seen. I rose because staying meant shrinking. Messages poured in, some from family, some from people I barely knew. A few even reached out professionally, asking for insight, for a quote, for guidance. I read them, then archived most without reply. One cousin wrote, "You should have told us. We would have given you credit." I replied to just that one. I didn't need credit. I needed decency. Then I blocked the thread. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. 2 days later, a lifestyle blog picked up the story. The headline read, "The heiress who vanished quietly until she didn't." It was a quiet wildfire, the kind that scorched reputation while looking like a candle flicker. Thousands commented, praising the restraint, the dignity, the refusal to play the game loud. A journalist reached out. "We'd love an exclusive with you, Ms. Hope." I declined and gave them Celine's name instead. The spotlight had never been my goal, but I knew exactly where to shine it now. That evening, as the sky dipped into its softest shade of pink, a package arrived at the Langston estate. Hand-delivered, sealed in textured white paper. Isolde opened it alone in her room. Inside was the ring, Grandma's ring. Beneath it, a small, handwritten note. "You needed it more than I did. I already know who I am." She stared at the ring, at the reflection bent and warped in the gem's surface. For the first time, she looked away from her own image. The ocean moved the same way memory does, gentle, but never idle. I sat on the deck of my villa, barefoot, wrapped in a linen throw, a mug of black tea cooling in my hand. There was no one to perform for, no staff gliding around with trays, no guests pretending to care, just salt air and silence. And yet, it was the loudest peace I had ever known. "There's power in walking away without needing a door to slam," I whispered aloud, to no one but the wind. My phone lit up with a new voicemail. It was from Theo, one of the few younger cousins who had always looked at me with curiosity instead of suspicion. I tapped play. "I don't think I ever told you," his voice said, soft and hesitant. "But you were my favorite." I smiled without blinking. No tears, just a quiet acknowledgement that someone had seen me, even if it came late. Another voicemail followed. This one was from the reunion. A high-pitched voice asked, "Aunt Elowen, do you still not have a real job?" I remembered the sting, the slow way those words had sunk into my chest that afternoon. But now, with the distance, it didn't hurt. It confirmed what I already knew. They weren't cruel on their own. They had inherited a story. "They didn't know," I said quietly, because their parents never asked. I opened my journal, the one I never showed anyone, and flipped to a blank page. At the top I wrote, "What they'll never know." And then I wrote it all. The burn of being cropped out of a family photo. The guilt I once assigned myself for not being loud enough. The first time I chose silence over spectacle, and how they mistook that for weakness. The way success looked when it wasn't shared on Instagram, when it built homes instead of headlines. Later that afternoon, I opened a large wooden box I hadn't touched in years. Old photos, estate event invites, letters written by relatives who only remembered me at tax season. Some I kept, some I burned, right there on the beach. The paper curled and cracked under flame, smoke drifting up like absolution. I wasn't burning anger. I was clearing space. Celine texted me while the ashes cooled. "They're asking how to fix things." I replied, "They can start by not fixing the truth." The next morning, the call came. My father, the first in months. There was no small talk, no weather commentary or drawn-out sighs, just static. Then his voice, "You made your point." I took a deep breath and answered, "It wasn't a point, it was a boundary." He paused, long enough that I thought he might hang up. But he didn't. He stayed on the line. He didn't apologize, but he didn't interrupt either. And for him, that was something. Sometimes you don't need an apology. You need a witness. That same day, I opened my inbox and found 2 invitations. One from Forbes, Women's Roundtable, not as an attendee, as a speaker. The other, a mentoring program for young women in tech, funded by a foundation that had once denied me a grant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt aligned. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror in my bathroom, wrote something in lipstick on the glass. "If they don't give you a seat at the table, build your own. And don't make it a circle." I stepped back, tilted my head, then nodded. It was a good reminder. Before bed, I opened my laptop and clicked New Document. At the top, I typed, "Legacy, my way." My fingers hovered. Then I wrote, "Once upon a silence, a woman built an empire no one saw coming." I clicked save, not publish, not yet. The venue overlooked Central Park, glass walls stretching high. The city softened beneath a curtain of summer light. No banners, no brass plaques, just clean space, crisp air, and a purpose I had carved with my own 2 hands. People filled the room, not cousins or uncles, but investors, activists, founders, thinkers. Every single one of them was here by invitation. Mine. My assistant approached with a clipboard. "Miss Hope, they're ready when you are." "Thank you," I said, adjusting the microphone on my collar. I liked the way it sounded. Miss Hope, not Olive, not sweetheart, not the quiet one. Legacy isn't what they leave behind, it's what you decide to carry forward. I stepped into the light. 10 minutes later, during the post-event mingling, a familiar face appeared at the edge of the crowd. A woman from the reunion, Isolde's second cousin, I think. Her expression was a mix of guilt and something close to awe. "I'm so sorry," she began. "I didn't know. I didn't really see you. Would you ever consider maybe we could reconnect?" I let her speak, fully. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a letter. "I wrote this, just in case." I didn't take it. "I didn't disappear," I said evenly. "You just weren't looking." Her hand hovered in the air, still holding the envelope. "I'm no longer collecting apologies," I added. She blinked, then nodded, tucking it back into her bag. Later that afternoon, I returned to my villa. A courier had arrived just minutes before I got back, Emma's handwriting on the envelope unmistakable. Inside was a drawing, a helicopter, me in sunglasses, the words, "You're the coolest," and a voice note. "Can I come visit your island sometime?" That one undid me. I wrote back that evening, "You always have a seat, just don't forget to ask real questions." That's the legacy I choose, curiosity, not judgment. The next day was the formal launch of the foundation. No Langstons were in the crowd. Not one family seat was filled. And still, I stood steady. I walked on stage with no fanfare. "Once," I began, "I tried to fit into someone else's story. Today, I start writing my own." I unveiled the mission: funding overlooked, women-led tech ventures, a spotlight for the silenced. Behind me, the screen displayed the words, "Founded by Ella and Hope, funded independently, answerable to no one." Applause came like a wave, not thunderous, but strong, respected. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just smiled. 2 days later, back at the villa, another package arrived. Wrapped in navy linen, it bore the Langston estate seal. Inside was a leather-bound book titled Family Archives. Someone had added pages, photos from old reunions, captions where my name was finally written. I was no longer edited out. I closed the book, walked it down to the dock, placed it in a weatherproof trunk labeled, "Not needed to be remembered." Because memory isn't always about who includes you. Sometimes it's about who you stop asking to. That evening, I stood at the edge of the dock as the wind lifted my hair. The sun melted into the ocean like it always does, patient and magnificent. My phone rang. "The board is ready for your closing statement, chairwoman," a voice said. I smiled, picked up the call. "Let them inherit silence," I replied. "I'm inheriting the future."